Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Speak Crime to Me. My name is Elena. So today I am going to update you on what happened on day 6 of the Murdaugh trial. So let's dive in. We start the day off with expert witness Brett Dove, the SLED forensic investigator who was analyzing Paul and Alec and Maggie's phones. Testifies that Find My iPhone was running on Maggie's phone at 10:05 p.m. on the night of the murders. That was more than an hour after the state says that Maggie was killed at 8:50 p.m. One kind of big blow to the state is that Dove admits that Maggie's phone was not continuously recording GPS location data, and Find My phone only tracked when the phone was in use. That someone was using Maggie's Find My iPhone when it tracked at 10:05 p.m. on the night of the murders. After that, it was locked for good. That is a potential cause for why the app was running in the moment that no one was using the phone. Now we're moving into Alec Murdaugh's cell phone data. Dove testifies that there are calls missing from Alec Murdaugh's phone log, including Alec's calls to Maggie's on the night of the murders, which Dove found on Maggie's phone. End quote. A gap like that would indicate that it actually was removed from there. Did Alec remove these calls? And is he, again, dumb because they were going to be on Maggie's phone? He does say that he cannot determine who removed those calls from the phone. But it happened sometime between June 7th, the night of the murders, and when he reviewed Alec Murdaugh's call log in September 2021. Just to make a quick note, and I saw this yesterday, apparently the jurors don't have notebooks, which yesterday was a lot of technical information, and right now we're learning a lot of dates and times and steps, so that's very interesting just to remember in the back of your mind. Here we go with Alec Murdaugh's text messages. So I'm going to read these verbatim. So Dove starts testifying about Alec Murdaugh's text messages. Yesterday, I had talked about how Maggie received 2 text messages from a group chat. One thing to note here that we found out today is that Alex doesn't read the text that he receives from that family group chat at 8:31 p.m. on June 7th, the night of the murders, until 1:44 p.m. the next day on the 8th. We're starting to get into Alec Murdaugh's steps. We left yesterday talking about the 3 known time steps of Maggie Murdaugh's phone, so let's talk about what we found on Alec's phone. Here we go. On the night of the murder, so June 7th, from 6:42 p.m. to 6:43 p.m., there were 57 steps. Then, at 6:52 p.m. through 7:02 p.m., he took 283 steps. At 7:03 p.m. to 7:11 p.m., there were 165 steps. At 7:15 p.m. to 7:21 p.m., 200 steps. 7:28 to 7:37 p.m., 47 steps. At 7:55 to 8:05 p.m., 270 steps. At 7:41 p.m. to 7:48 p.m., 29 steps. From 8:05 p.m. to 8:09 p.m., 74 steps. From 9:02 p.m. to 9:06 p.m., 283 steps. Note, there is about an hour gap from 8:09 p.m. to 9:02 p.m. There are no steps recorded. Remember, the prosecution is saying that the murders occurred around 8:50 p.m. So he took a step at 8:09 p.m., but he didn't take a step again until 9:02 p.m. Very interesting. We are now moving on to Paul Murdoch's phone with this forensic investigator, Dove. He starts talking about, and we mentioned this yesterday, about how the Secret Service agent, John Van Houten, finally unlocked Paul's phone around March of 2022. So after he unlocks it, this is when Brett Dove starts to analyze Paul's phone. So let's go over, we've talked about Paul's phone conversations before, but I'm just going to repeat that just so we can keep everything in context. So here is on June 7th. Paul spoke to Rogan Gibson twice before his phone locked for the rest of the evening. Once for 4 minutes at 8:40 p.m., and then for 11 seconds, once for 4 minutes and 14 seconds at 8:40 p.m. and 20 seconds, then again for 11 seconds at 8:44 and 34 seconds. So almost back to back. Paul called Rogan both times, and those were the last calls that he would ever make or receive. Now we're moving on to Paul's texts. Paul read a text from someone named Megan at 8:48 p.m. Then a text comes from Rogan Gibson 30 seconds later at 8:49 p.m. and it was never read. So really it was about... So the text from Megan was at 8:48 and so it came in, he read that text at 8:48, 1 second away from 8:49. Within 35 seconds, Rogan Gibson texted him and he never read that text. So we're talking about a span of 35 seconds. In comparison, Paul's last text that he read was at 8:48 p.m. and 59 seconds. The last text Maggie read was at 8:49 p.m. and 27 seconds. One thing to note, it was established that Paul's phone was at 2% battery at the time. However, that wouldn't have prevented him from reading Rogan's text. He says that when on 2% battery, even while being used heavily, that would last about 10 or 15 more minutes, max. Dove then testifies that Paul's phone died for good at 10:34 p.m., well after he stopped receiving and answering text messages. He also says that Paul's phone recorded his location a lot more than Maggie's phone did. Dove testifies that the last text that Paul Murdoch ever sent was a movie recommendation to his friend Megan. That was at 8:48 p.m. on the night of the murders on June 7th. He suggested A Star is Born. They established that Paul used his iPhone frequently, no surprise there, sending texts, Snapchats, and using other apps. A number of apps tracked his location frequency, but suddenly Suddenly, just after 8:49 p.m. on the night of the murders, all activity stops until the phone dies at 10:34 p.m. So now that we've talked about Maggie's steps and Alex's steps, let's talk about Paul's steps. At 6:54 p.m. to 7:03 p.m., he took 135 steps. At 7:14 p.m. to 7:22 p.m., he took 208 steps. At 7:25 to 7:34 p.m., he took 139 steps. At 7:35 p.m. to 7:41 p.m., he took 171 steps. At 7:45 p.m. to 7:55 p.m., he took 89 steps. Then we're going to jump to 8:15 p.m. to 8:21 p.m. He took 140 steps. At 8:32 p.m. to 8:42 p.m., he took 283 steps. There were no steps recorded on Paul's phone after 8:42 p.m. However, Dove testifies that he could have traveled a very short distance during this time and it wouldn't have necessarily recorded the steps. All right, here we go. This is the moment I think we've been waiting for since the trial started. So we are now the state puts into evidence a video on Paul's phone that is said to put Alec Murdaugh at the dog kennels in the minutes before Paul and Maggie's phones stop sending or answering calls and texts. Here the video.
Quit, Cash. Come. Quit. That's okay. Come here. It's not bad. Come here, Cash. Come here. Post it. Cash.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth.
Hey, Bubba.
That's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
Come here, Bubba.
Come here, Cash.
Come here, Bubba.
Cash. Quit.
Video. So it is timed at 8:44 p.m. and 49 seconds, and it lasts until 8:45 p.m. and 47 seconds, so about a minute long. The audio isn't great, and during this time, Paul Murdaugh is crying pretty hysterically at his defense table. That is how the prosecution ends. Their testimony with Brett Dove, and now it's time for the defense. The defense establishes right away with Dove that Alec's phone steps and Maggie's phone steps don't align up as we would expect them to if one person held both of the phones in their hand. Basically says, in quote, "I would expect to see steps on both phones." So the defense then starts asking Dove about the change of Maggie's phone orientation that we talked about yesterday. The defense basically says, or it established with Dove, that a phone's orientation can change if it's chucked out of a window. We do know that Maggie's phone was found off of the side of the road. The defense then suggests that the final orientation or the orientation change of Maggie's phone is the moment that it was chucked out the window at 9:06 p.m. But again, Dove doesn't really confirm that that is what happened. No one knows if that's what happened. I have to laugh. The defense floats this notion around. The defense is suggesting that a possible theory about the phone being chucked out the window is that the killer took Maggie's phone, had it in their hand as Maggie's phone was receiving an incoming call from Alex, and then chucked it out the window because they got scared. The defense establishes that Alex Murdaugh was walking, that his phone was recording step data as he called Maggie at 9:06 p.m., a second before he stops walking and cranks up the Suburban. Around the time Maggie's phone records its final orientation, only Alex's phone was recording steps. That is something I think to really note, that it's probably a win for the defense. Dove confirms this, that at the time that Maggie's phone changed orientation, for the last time, it appears the phones were not together being moved by the same person because they were not both recording steps. Only Alex's was. And some are saying that probably gave a little bit more context to the two shooter theory that the defense has been going after all along. Now the prosecution goes back up to cross-examine Dove, and he's poking holes at the fact or of the theory of the phone being chucked out the window. The prosecution establishes with Dove that a phone with its screen off wouldn't record an orientation change. They also establish with Maggie's phone that Maggie's phone screen was off from 9:07 p.m. to 9:31 p.m., so it wouldn't have recorded any orientation changes then. All right. The 17th witness is Paul's friend, Rogan Gibson, that we've been hearing about with phone calls and text messages. And he is one of the last people to speak to Paul before he was killed. He testifies that he considered the Murdochs a second family to him, and he had nicknames for all of the different Murdochs, the Murdoch family members. They do some background questioning on Rogan Gibson about his knowledge of all the guns and the Moselle property. He also says that the video that supposedly we hear Maggie and Alex voices on, the last video that Paul shot, was of his dog, a chocolate lab named Cash. He recalls talking to Paul on the phone at 8:40 p.m. on the night of the murders of the 7th. They talked about his dog, and if something was possibly wrong with his dog's tail. When he talked to Paul, Paul was at the kennels talking about his dog, and he says he could hear Maggie in the background, and he believes he could also hear Alex. He says that he fell asleep around 10 p.m. on the night of the 7th and slept through Alex's calls to him. I brought that up, how it was weird how Rogan Gibson was trying to get a hold of Paul and then also texted Maggie, but then missed calls from Alex. And those started, I think, around like 10:07-ish. He found out about the murders the next morning and drove to Moselle to pick up his dog. He also started being interviewed by SLED investigators starting on the 8th, so the day he went to go pick up his dog. He testifies that on the day that he was interviewed on the 8th, that he was 99% sure that he heard Alex in the background when he was on the phone with Paul around 8:40. Remember, Alex says that he was in the main house and he fell asleep. Then testifies after watching the video with his dog, he is 100% positive that he heard voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alex in it. End quote. Prosecutor says, "Did you recognize the voices of your second family?" And Gibson says, "I did." The state then calls its 18th witness. His name is Will Loving. It's another friend of the Murdochs. He met Paul when Paul was 15. Witness, they just try to establish a lot again about this missing gun and when it was last seen, the replacement gun, and things like that. This gentleman testifies that the replacement .300 blackout rifle testifies that the last time he saw the .300 blackout replacement gun was at the Moselle property around mid-March or early April 2021, a couple of months before the murders. Talk about the last time this person heard from Paul. He received a Snapchat video from him on June 7th. The video showed Alex and Paul looking at trees they planted and leaning over. This was the 7:56 p.m. video. Now ask him if he recognized the voices in the 8:44 p.m. video. He says he does. We are hearing the video a third time in court today. Loving testifies he heard the voices of Paul, Maggie, and Alex Murdaugh. The prosecution asks, how sure are you? This guy says 100%. So now, two Murdaugh family friends have confirmed that Alec Murdaugh's voice is heard in that 8:44 p.m. video. They just again talk about asking the relationship between Paul and Alex, and he says that it seemed like Paul was the apple of his eye. They play a Snapchat video that this gentleman got from Paul, and you can see Alex is wearing long pants and a shirt in that video. Not what he is wearing later that evening after the murders, which are shorts and a white t-shirt. He testifies that neither Paul or Maggie sounded stressed or nervous in the video shortly before they were killed, as they don't sound worried like there's some stranger there they don't know. He claims the first time he watched that video was in November 2022, well after Alex Murdaugh was arrested or indicted on murder charges. Plays the video for a second time, and then the prosecution ends their testimony with Rogan Gibson, and the defense takes over. They establish that Alec Murdaugh is like a second father to Gibson, and says that Alex and Paul had a great relationship. Basically establishes that the Murdaughs kept trucks all over the Moselle property. They were unlocked and often had guns in them. Guns were everywhere. In the gun room, in the shed, in the workshop, there was no security cameras down by the hangar or the kennels. They get Gibson to agree that it would be easy for someone to sneak up on the Moselle property and steal things, given how the family left things lying around unprotected. He also says how he also talks about how cell phone service is very spotty at the Moselle property. Some places you would get a signal, some places you wouldn't. It takes about 2 minutes to get to the main house from the kennels. They usually took ATVs and golf carts. You could do it in a minute if you're going very fast. Gibson says that he never saw Paul with a replacement gun, that he usually used a Buster's Black 300 Blackout that had a thermoscope. We know that the replacement did not have a thermoscope. Now they start going over the video. Gibson testifies it is Alex who calls out Bubba, the family's yellow lab, to drop a chicken he had in his mouth. Also says that he spent a lot of time around the family, and that Alex and Maggie were a loving couple. They loved Buster and Paul. They ask him, could you imagine under any circumstance that Alex would kill Paul and Maggie? And Gibson says, not that I can think of. The defense has been trying to keep this out of the trial, but finally today, the prosecution got some information into the jury about Murdaugh's financial struggles. The prosecution asked this gentleman if he was aware of Murdaugh's finances, his debts, how he spent his money, and on the 2019 boat crash wrongful death case. And this gentleman says no. The prosecution asks him this question: did you know anything about him, meaning Alec Murdaugh, being confronted on the mornings of June 7th about a $792,000 of missing fees from the law firm? And this gentleman says no. The defense is really trying hard to get the judge to rule that these financial questions and issues of Alec Murdaugh's will not come into play, as the motive as much as the prosecution is pushing for them to be, because again, this is the main motive that the prosecution has, saying this is why Alec Murdaugh would commit these murders. They have argued against the judge about the prosecution wanting to bring them in, the defense not, and the judge basically says that he's going to rule on this issue at a later time. And that is how they end the day. A lot of information again. I feel like a couple of wins for the prosecution, especially with these close family friends saying that they did hear Alec Murdaugh's voice in these videos, and we know that Alec had been saying he was nowhere near the kennels. He was sleeping until he left at 9:06 p.m. or 9:02 p.m. So let's see what happens tomorrow. And thank you all again for joining me here on Speak Crime to Me. Until next time.